it's time to actually lock up the deal. Real Estate Lab. So we have made an LOI. We've sent an LOI to the seller. We got our LOI accepted. Now it's time to actually lock up the deal in what we call a purchase and sale agreement. Purchase agreement, a PA, a PSA, a lot of different terms, phrases you'll see for this. Purchase and sale agreement is the binding contract that actually locks up a property. A couple things about this. Once you are under contract to buy a property with a purchase and sale agreement, given that it's a standard PSA and it was written by a good attorney, you are bound to this agreement, right? And there's a couple things to know about that. For the seller and the buyer, it's a little bit different. The buyer will normally have certain outs, certain ways to get out of a purchase agreement. Now remember, our recourse as a buyer, right, this purchase agreement allows us to purchase this property from the seller. We are putting a deposit down for that right to purchase for the time period that it takes to purchase the property. We have a deposit. We have an inspection period. We have a closing period. During the inspection period, depending on how the purchase agreement is written, there may or may not be ways to say, hey, I've changed my mind. I've decided I don't want to buy this property anymore, and allows you to back out of the contract. Now, backing out of the contract could have certain recourse. Normally, the extent of your recourse or your liability is going to be your earnest money deposit. Either the contract says you are enabled to have your earnest money be refunded, or it is non-refundable earnest money. And if you back out of the contract, the seller keeps your earnest money deposit. This is the risk we deal with while going under contract on properties, is our earnest money deposit's out. We're spending money on our due diligence and our inspections, right? And so that is what we call our risk capital, our risk money. So if you can negotiate refundable earnest money, that's always best. During your inspection period, we can back out of the contract at any time for any reason, and we get earnest money back. It's not always the case, but that's what you'd like to have happen. Other scenario, it's non-refundable. If you back out at any time for any reason, you don't get your earnest money back unless the seller defaults on the contract, or unless there is a clause in the contract which allows you to get out of the contract in specific scenarios. Now, again, I think I should have started with this. I'm not an attorney. I'm going to give you a disclaimer. I'm not writing your contracts for you. Do not use this contract. Always consult with an attorney before you make any legal action. I am simply here to talk you guys through the different scenarios, talk you guys through an example of a purchase agreement just to show you. This is an example of a purchase agreement I actually used to buy a property. Don't use this. Please don't use this template. Make sure you have an attorney go through and actually create you a new one. But it's important. You guys need to see this because some of the biggest things that we have this contract for is for our inspection due diligence period. Can we get out of it? Do we proceed? What are the different things that trigger based on what's going on, and certain outs of the contract in case something comes up during our due diligence that we don't like and we don't want to buy the property anymore. We need that recourse to be able to get out. We need the ability to either be able to get out or to retrade, right? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So purchase agreement can be anywhere from 5, 10. Normally it's at least 20 pages. In my experience, 20 pages to 40 pages. This one, I think, is 21. It's relatively short, which is nice. So it doesn't need to be overly complicated, but there's a lot of things in here. I would suggest, because you guys, a lot of you guys are new watching this. You haven't looked at purchase agreements before. I'm going to walk you through kind of the main sections in here and just show you as an example. It looks like it's just a lot of legal jargon, BS. Maybe it's unimportant. Every word really does count and really matters in the purchase agreement, though. So I would suggest, as you're getting started, every property that you go to purchase and every purchase agreement you put together, you need to read every single word of it. And I'll normally go through, I'll sit down and I'll scroll through and read every single line of a purchase agreement when it's sent over from my attorney. I will give them some feedback and send it back to them for edits. And then what we do is we send it over to the seller, or if I'm the seller, I send it over to the purchaser, and they're going to have their attorneys look at it, do what's called a red line, which they're going to mark it up with edits normally, and they're going to send it back to you. And you're going to either agree or disagree with their edits. Some you might agree on, some you might disagree on. And then this is negotiation. I have seen purchase agreements go anywhere from, I sent it over and they signed it instantly, which is extremely rare with this sophisticated seller, all the way to 2 months of negotiating. I've had purchase agreements go past 2 months of negotiations because there's just one paragraph or one sentence that they disagree on. And at the end of the day, it's so stupid because if you want to buy a property and they want to sell the property, just move forward. But I understand at the same time, I've been in that scenario where I disagree based on the condition of a property. I disagree with the verbiage in here because I need to protect myself and protect my earnest and risk money. I need to be able to get that money back if I find something that they didn't disclose to me, right? Commercial real estate is not like residential real estate. Commercial real estate, a seller signs a purchase agreement. They are bound. And residential real estate's like this, but I'd say it's a lot more strict. It's the Wild West. Buyer beware, right? In commercial real estate. And if you sign as a seller a purchase agreement to sell and you want to back out, you can't. As long as the buyer is performing all the buyer's duties and obligations, they could technically, if you decide you don't want to sell the property after you sign it as a seller, they could sue you for what's called specific performance and force you to sell a property. A judge will side with the buyer most of the time, almost all the time. And I've never had to go through that. But as a seller, once you agree to sell, you have to sell it. You have to sell the property as long as the buyer is upholding their end of the agreement. Now, as a buyer, you have the option whether you want to proceed or not proceed. You are just risking whether you keep your earnest money or lose your earnest money. That is your risk. So let's walk through this. I'm just going to show you guys different sections of this. Normally just starts off effective date, who's the parties and the agreements. In legal contracts, they always define, Toupin Holdings is the purchaser, because then they could just say the purchaser. They don't have to say Toupin Holdings every time. Seller, same thing. So they're giving terms to the purchaser and sellers. It describes the property, 52 apartments located at the address. Exhibit A is normally going to be the legal description of the property. Seller desires to sell and purchaser desires to purchase. A lot of this stuff seems self-explanatory, but it's in there for a reason. So what is the offer? Purchaser hereby offers and agrees to purchase the real estate together with all improvements and appurtenances, leasehold interests, and all personalty owned by seller located at the property that is aforementioned. It tells what is included: equipment, mailboxes, pumps, cleaning and other supplies, office equipment, drapes, carpeting, equipment, anything attached to the property. Basically, it's just saying, what comes with the purchase. Seller signing this is accepting delivery of fully executed agreement and is accepting the offer of the purchaser. Purchase price, self-explanatory. This is what the purchase price of the property is. Deposit. So this is normally an important category that you want to review thoroughly. Within 3 days, 3 business days versus regular days matter. That business day is Monday through Friday, not including national holidays. So if there is a holiday on a Monday and you sign this on a Friday, you actually have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday would be your third day. That's the third business day from a Friday if there was a holiday on that Monday. So 3 business days after the effective date, which is the effective date is the date the contract was signed. Purchaser shall deposit in escrow with a aforementioned title company, or the title company here, whose address is blah, 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 an earnest money deposit in the amount of $25,000, the deposit, which such sum shall be held in an escrow account and applied upon the purchase price at closing if the transaction is consummated, or delivered to purchaser or seller as the circumstances may warrant under the terms of this agreement. within 2 days of the expiration, 2 business days of the expiration of the inspection period, the purchaser shall deposit in escrow an additional earnest money sum in the amount of $50,000, which shall become part of the deposit for the purposes of this agreement. The deposit shall not be invested by the escrow agent into an interest-bearing account. Okay. So balance, self-explanatory. The balance of the purchase price after the deposit is applied to it is going to be paid to seller at closing in exchange for a warranty deed conveying fee simple marketable title to purchaser free and clear of any and all liens or encumbrances. All right. Evidence of title. Within 10 days of the effective date, seller shall furnish or cause to be furnished to purchaser a commitment for an Alta owner policy of title insurance to be issued at closing, without standard exceptions in the amount of the total purchase price, which commitment shall be issued by the title company. Together with title commitment, seller shall deliver to purchaser legible copies of all documents recorded in the chain of title. So basically this is saying that the seller has to provide the purchaser with a title commitment, title policy without standard exceptions, and it will be up to us to review it. Normally, once we review it, if we have any issues with the title policy, they can try to cure it. There's a cure periods in these contracts, right? If the seller does something wrong or the seller defaults, there is oftentimes a cure period. A lot of times we try to make that cure period as short as possible, right? For us to have as many outs in this contract as the purchaser is really important, right? Because if we find something that we don't like with the property and we have non-refundable earnest money at that time, we might try to find another way to get in or out of the contract. That's commercial real estate, guys. I mean, much as you hate to say it, it is like that. We're trying to find loopholes a lot of times. Ideally, we're not. Ideally, we're going into a contract. We're going to buy a property at the agreed upon price, and there's no issues. But that's almost never the case. A lot of times, the seller hides stuff. You don't know what's actually going on in the property. You underwrote it with certain assumptions, and you find out that, hey, they told us it was 90% occupied. We just toured all the units, and it's actually 60% occupied. Well, now I can't get financing from my bank, and I have hard earnest money, and the seller lied to me about something, so I need to renegotiate this deal. If you have hard earnest money, it's hard to renegotiate a deal because the seller could just say, well, if you back out, I get to keep your deposit. Well, for the seller, if they don't want to go back to market and spend and waste all that time, they want you to buy it, they might take a price reduction. If you have the ability and leverage to back out with getting your earnest money back, now you have some leverage. So all that's kind of important. So sellers to provide purchaser a copy of a survey, objection to the condition of title, that's kind of what I was talking about. Possession shall be delivered to purchaser at the time of closing. Representations and warranties. So this is a big section I want you guys to focus on. This is what the seller and the purchaser, there's going to be reps and warranties both ways. But let's start with seller. The seller is going to represent and warrant unto purchaser as of this date, notwithstanding the delivery of any closing documents, as to the following. They are going to represent and warrant the legal description is an accurate description of the 52-unit apartment building described at the address. The rent roll, they're representing that the rent roll is true, correct, and genuine. Except as disclosed in the rent roll, there are no concessions. So they're saying that there's no verbal agreements with any tenant that, hey, you don't have to pay rent for the next 6 months. Now we're going to assume that obligation. They're just telling us that, hey, what's on the rent roll that's attached is correct, is true and accurate and genuine. And so that gives you an out right there. The seller is representing and warranting that they're going to do all these items in number 6, right? And if the seller doesn't accomplish all these, or if they lie, or if something is falsified, that gives you an out in the contract, regardless of whether your earnest money is refundable or non-refundable. So each of the 52 rentable units is complete with the following functional and usable items, for example. The subject premises is a 52-unit apartment complex. If you walk through the property and it's only 49 units, and they lied, there were 3 units that they're the basement units, but they're not certified for occupancy by the city. That gives you a default on the seller's behalf and the option to leave and back out of the contract at that point. All leases conform to the standard form of lease. Let's see. Leases are true and correct. Seller's not a foreign person as defined by the IRS. Okay. let's see. There are new lawsuits, tax appeals against the property to the seller's knowledge. No bankruptcy, insolvency, rearrangement. Seller has the complete power and authority to enter into this agreement. I mean, it has happened before where, normally in a more mom and pop property where, maybe a husband and wife got divorced, one of them still living on the property, they try to sell it, but they're not actually the legal owner. They maybe thought they were, but they have no clue what they're doing, and they're not actually the legal owner. Do they have the power and authority to sign a purchase agreement and sell the property? Well, the title company is going to check into this and make sure who it's deeded to and that the deeded owner is the one that's actually signing on the sale documents. So you can go under contract on a property with somebody who's not actually the seller. Title company is going to figure that out. And then you could back out of the contract. They can't keep your deposit if they didn't actually have the power and authority to enter into this agreement. Crazier things have happened. Next section, conditions precedent to closing. What conditions precedent means is that these conditions must be precedent for us to close on the property. These conditions have to be met. So satisfaction of title and survey conditions. Let's read through this one. Seller shall deliver to purchaser the information enumerated in the schedule of property information in Exhibit F. So normally that's a due diligence, like a document list. The seller has to give us the leases and the contracts with the property and, property tax bills, utility bills, financials. There's a whole list of things. A copy of their insurance policy. There's a whole list of things that they have to provide to us. And so this is saying a condition precedent to close is that they fulfilled that obligation. No material changes to physical or economic condition of the subject premises. I added this in there. The subject premises being at closing not less than 92% leased and occupied. You can't always get away with that, but I had them add this in here and they agreed to it. The property had to be 92% leased and occupied for us to close. And if they went below that, we could either extend the contract or back out of the contract or give them a period to cure it. But that protects us from them stopping leasing the property. It totally falls apart. They're now at 80% occupancy and we can't get the property financed. So that protects us. So that's a condition precedent to closing. On a monthly basis, they shall furnish us a current rent roll, obtain licenses and permits required to operate the subject premises. All vacant units in the premises must be in rent-ready condition, or they have to give us $1,000 credit for each unit that is not. Same with appliances. A credit for an appliance is reasonably estimated if there are not appliances in the property. So, this is just saying that these things all have to be conditions precedent for us to close. Continuing on, warranty deed, conveying marketable fee, simple title must be there. This is for closing. The seller shall close this transaction. This is our extension. I talked to you guys about the extension. Purchaser shall have the option to extend for additional $10,000, another 30 days. Moving on. Let's see. Drawing site plans, rent rolls, signable contracts, a letter to the tenants prepared by purchaser and signed by seller, indicating that the property has been sold and directing all future rental payments to the purchaser now. Closing adjustments. So what closing adjustments is this defines how prorations occur at closing. And it's so silly, but I've gotten into fights over these at closing where, how do we prorate rent? You close in the middle of the month and tenants have paid rent in the middle of the month and there are tenants that haven't paid rent yet. Who gets the rent checks? Who collects rent that it's been uncollected as of closing? Are there credits given? All that kind of stuff. It's talked about in here so that when it comes down to it, you have a guide to follow. You're not going to get into an argument at the end of closing because it's written in here and you signed and agreed to it. And we're going to follow the purchase agreement. So we're basically figuring all these things out front so that we have a smooth transaction and that we're all in agreement. Okay. Continuing on. Indemnity. Indemnity is important. I want the seller to indemnify and hold me harmless against liabilities before closing occurs. And the seller wants me to indemnify and hold them harmless for anything that occurs post-closing. So let's say you go under contract to purchase a property. 5 days before closing, a tenant slips and falls, sues the seller. I don't want to get wrapped into that. So the seller needs to indemnify me against that liability. Vice versa. The day after closing, tenant slips and falls, hurts himself. They don't really know the property's sold yet. They sue the seller. The seller's no longer the owner. I'm now the owner. The suit really has to fall on me, and I have to indemnify and hold the seller harmless because it was no longer their responsibility. So it goes both ways. Broker, it's defining if there's a broker. Surviving obligations, what obligations of this agreement, they're going to survive the purchase or sale of the property for X amount of time. Sometimes there's certain obligations. There are a lot of times a limit to the defaults. So let's say you close on the property and then you find something out. There was something that the seller, a huge thing that the seller hid from you. A boiler had broken before closing. You get in there afterwards. You're like, oh my gosh, the seller never told me about this. Just some crazy stuff goes down. There's oftentimes you have the ability to go back and, I'm not remembering the word right now, the term, but there's a limit to the liability that the seller has. So you would have to come back to them within the first, 90, 120, 180 days after closing in order to be able to pursue them for that. After that, their liability is released. So I don't remember the exact word. I apologize, but there's a word for that. So, and the rest of this is going to be receipt of deposits and exhibits. So exhibits are attachments of the legal description, personal property items that are included, the rent roll, standard form of tenant lease, and then all these things get attached at the bottom. So this might add another, 30, 40, 50 pages to this. And then we're going to have a finalized contract with all these contracts and exhibits, rent roll, all that kind of stuff is going to be attached to this. So it'll double or triple the size of this contract at the end once they add all these exhibits and attachments. So that is a purchase agreement. Like I said, 1 to 2 weeks to negotiate. Always hire an attorney when you're buying commercial property. I don't suggest using the standard residential agent, the standard state commercial contracts. A lot of times every state will have, their standard residential form and their standard commercial form. I don't suggest using that. Get a custom contract. It's going to cost you $1,500 to $5,000, depending on how long you take to negotiate it with your attorney fees. And you're going to be much better protected. You're going to have an attorney looking out for you. You're going to know going into it that you have all the things that are important for your protection in there. Spend the money. Don't be cheap, and hire an attorney. So very important part of the process. Once you sign this, you are locked in to the contract, and you are 100% able to buy this property now. Like I said, the seller cannot back out unless you default. So make sure you know everything in this contract, know all your responsibilities that you have to follow. Make sure you follow all the time frames. I normally go in right away. I add to my calendar all of the closing, due diligence, inspection, title time periods, so that I know what's coming up, what are all the important effective dates of the contract, so that I can follow it and uphold my obligations, so that the seller has no way to ever back out, and that I can purchase this property regardless of if they change their mind or not. So that is an example of a purchase agreement, guys. Read them through every line so you can get familiar with them. It's going to take 3, 4, 5 of these to really start to understand how it works, but hopefully this helps. I did not have anyone to really walk me through the main categories of this, from the main business points of the deal, the purchase price, deposits, and all that, to the representations and warranties, to the conditions precedent to closing, to the seller deliverables. I mean, I never had anyone walk me through that when I first got started, so I had to read through these over and over again. And now, you go through 20, 30 of these, you really get to see, how they work and the little things that people try and throw in there to trip up the contract and give themselves an out. Like, you just really have to be careful and always hire an attorney to do this. I've spent well over $100,000 on purchase agreements alone in the past 5 years, and every penny is worth it because I feel safe and protected when I'm going and buying a property. So next chapter, chapter 7, we are going to be going over the transaction process. I'll see you guys soon.